You've got a lot to do. Wouldn't it be nice to have a little less on your mind? Eide Bailly can take the pressure off your day-to-day accounting, taxes, data issues, and other business needs. What inspires you inspires us.
This is the Ebb and Flow podcast with Eide Bailly, where you'll find inspired insights on forward movements in the middle market. Now let's get to the show.
Hello and welcome to Ebb and Flow. I'm your host, Clinton Larson, and today we're going to be talking about navigating the challenges of family succession in business. And joining me to talk about that topic is Chad Flanagan, a partner here at Eide Bailly. Welcome to the podcast, Chad.
Glad to be with you, Clinton.
So today's topic, family-owned businesses are obviously a backbone to the economy in the U.S. here, and many start those businesses, I think, with the idea that, maybe one day they're going to pass that down to the next generation. And, doing some research for this topic, I found that it looks like around 30% of family-owned businesses transition to that next generation, that percentage drops drastically as we get into the third or the fourth generation. So I'm curious, you work with a lot of families in this succession process, what is that typical of what you see?
It really is. We know that if a business is successful in getting to the third or fourth generation, that they're doing something right. Either they have a good succession plan and process, or they've worked very hard to get this to the next generation. And so, we like to celebrate with those clients as they get to the third or fourth, fifth generation. It's difficult. And I think that's why we see the percentages low as they are. And so, those that take on a process and get help have a much higher chance of success.
What makes that transition so difficult for a lot of families?
It's about the emotions, Clinton. So it's a very difficult process. We work with a lot of business owners that have a hard time letting go, have a hard time trusting in the next generation to pick up where they left off. And so we find that sellers and the exiting generation has a difficult time because the process is innately difficult to navigate. So you imagine that you have to choose a new successor and you have to choose between your children or your siblings' children. That's a very difficult process. Or you have to kind of plan the next stage of your life, and you've probably you've tied your success to your personality. You're afraid of what business or what life looks like once you pass on that business. And so it's very important in a process like this to step back and understand the emotions involved in the process. And really, we've started to work more with business owners and ask them those difficult questions of what are you going to do as you retire? What role do you want to play in the company, if any? What are your hobbies? Things like that you wouldn't think would be important to a succession plan, but are very important.
We've been talking about succession and transition of businesses on the podcast here for the last couple of episodes. And one of the things that I've been hearing through these conversations is, you need time. You need to give yourself a good runway for this stuff. So I'm curious, when someone's starting to think about a transition, like a family succession, where and how do you start that conversation then? What's an ideal sort of time frame? How do you get rolling on what you were just saying, like some possibly very difficult questions?
Yeah, that's a great question, because getting started is just, it's so important, and it's where a lot of business owners fall down, that it is difficult to get some momentum behind it. We like to work with our clients and tell them that if they give us 3 to 5 years to work with them, we can get a good plan in place and help them be successful in the process. And that usually starts with the business owner. Not always. Sometimes we get generation 2 that says, hey, I'm ready. Help me talk to my mom or my dad or G1 and get a process in place. But a lot of times it is that current business owner that says, I'm of this certain age and I need to start thinking about next steps. What do I do? Can you help me? And so that is step one. And we can kind of go through, and we like to involve all the stakeholders in that process. So that's the next generation. That could be family owners, family employees, could be non-participating family, that it affects everybody. And so the more we can invite to the process, the more successful we think it will be. It creates buy-in, and I think that's the key, Clint, that if you get everybody a chance to participate, you create buy-in and plans are more successful that way.
That's good to know. Yeah, I was just thinking my next question would obviously be like, you're thinking about getting all these family members together and my holidays are pretty good, but I know I hear horror stories from other people, so like in terms of like you have a family like that together, how do you make sure everyone's on the same page, or what do you do to ensure everyone is on the same page?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is why family business is so great and why it can be so difficult, is that these people are together a lot. And so it is, I think, very important to have a team, a third-party facilitator. We oftentimes in this process will interview each of the stakeholders and find out that things that they really haven't talked to each other about, strain in relationships, or you might find out that those that were pegged for leadership and ownership responsibility aren't interested in those things, and you might find that the leader you thought was going to take over the business doesn't have the confidence of the rest of the team. So it is those things that I think sometimes a facilitator or third party can get from those stakeholders that maybe a family member can't. But that is a challenging part of this, is that this affects the holidays and this affects the family get-togethers, where obviously closely held businesses, you don't have those same challenges.
Right. So tough conversations, but obviously necessary conversations. So what are some tips that you would have for navigating those kind of conversations? When you walk into a situation where you maybe know there's some potential for some stress or some strain, what are you doing to help mitigate that, and how do you just approach those conversations?
I think the first step is just to appreciate that there are a lot of emotions with this process. Early in my career, Clinton, I would kind of jump into tax implications and business value and structuring notes and things that were attractive. And it was probably more quantitative analysis. And I think as we work with more and more families, we understand how important it is to understand the relationships. We like to start a question with all those stakeholders and really ask, what is your social contract with the business? What do you want for yourself and your family from this business? And we are often surprised at the responses we get. And so we find that sometimes these individuals don't have the risk tolerance to be an owner of a business, or they have other passions in life and we're afraid to talk about it. So I think just having some one-on-one time with the stakeholders, really understand what drives them, what excites them about the business, and what concerns they have is an important step.
And what are some of the other common challenges you see pop up as you're having these conversations? You mentioned some pretty big ones there, but what are some other ones that just, maybe people wouldn't see coming, but is sort of a common challenge that, happens with family succession?
Yeah, with family businesses, you have the additional stress of figuring out where everybody fits in the business. I think that's issue number one. Who should have a leadership role? Who gets opportunity in the business? You have family, you have spouses, you have non-family employees. So there is a lot of jockeying to figure out who fits in what role, and it does affect family harmony in that way. But if you think about it, there is a host of other issues that family businesses have, including compensation, promotion eligibility. Some families have governance issues that would require you to work outside of the business for some number of years. And I think just kind of getting a plan together and navigating through those and getting on the same page is an important step there.
And I'm guessing, like a lot of parts of a transaction, there's no cookie cutter approach to this process with a family, right? Like, you're dealing with such a history there in terms of how people have lived together, how people have treated each other. It must always be a unique approach when you're taking on this process, I would guess.
Yeah, you're right. You're dealing with people that have known each other their whole lives. I've had discussions and interviews with stakeholders where there is conflict between parties, and stories about fights on the playground come up, and you just don't have that in the world where
Right.
on family business. And
Right.
so it's important to recognize those things. And the other thing I'd say, Clinton, is that sometimes the conflict comes from just people with different visions for the business. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. And so stepping back, going through a succession planning process, it's really as much a strategic planning process as anything to say, what are our goals? How fast do we want to grow? How aggressive do we want to be? How much risk do we want to take? We find naturally that generation one probably wants to minimize risk and protect their assets and their investment. And generation two wants to grow and conquer the world. And so they want to take risks. And so they fight on a daily basis over operational issues because they view the direction of the company in two very different ways. And so to invest in equipment, technology, people is there's two different approaches to that, and it leads to conflict. So again, I'm preaching a lot of get a plan together, go through a process, but a lot of good things happen from those steps.
And what does success look like in those scenarios? Obviously you just mentioned there could be conflicting goals in terms of where people are at in their lives. So how do you sort of define success for a family succession plan?
That is one of the questions we would ask those stakeholders as well, is just how do you see this? The easy answer, I think, is that if you look 2-3 years after the transition, that the company's successful, that people figured out their roles, that, that they were properly trained and developed to fill those roles, and that the business owner or generation one has let go and let the new leadership make some of their own decisions. I know that's always a touchy area. Is the exiting shareholder has helped create this company. They know the company inside and outside. Most buyers want to continue and get their help in a transition, but that looks different for everybody, and so that's an important step. But yeah, you can't really tell until you look 3 to 5 years later and say, yep, they're off and running and growing the company in their own way.
I wanted to ask about what you were just talking about too, this idea of the generation one or the current owner wanting to stick around for a little bit and maybe just not be the boss, but have some hands in there and just make sure things are going smoothly. How do you navigate that sort of power transfer when you're maybe they both maybe two generations agree, okay, yeah, we'll do this together for a while, but I'm going to be in charge and you're just going to be like a consultant kind of deal maybe. How do you navigate those kind of discussions and that kind of plan?
It's good to talk about it. It's good to have those parties talk about how they see this play out. I think sometimes we really like that exiting shareholder to serve on a board or have oversight at a really high level, but let the new generation be the day-to-day leadership and let them figure out how they want to accomplish those goals. So that's one scenario where we think that is a good path going forward. But there is oftentimes, customer relationships to transition, some know-how in operations or the industry, and the buyers really want to benefit from that knowledge. And so it's just good to have good communication on, what each party wants, because sometimes those sellers already just wash their hands clean after a couple months, and maybe that's welcomed, or maybe that is a concern for the buyers. It's good to have that conversation.
You mentioned before that sometimes, the person that maybe we thought was going to take over our business isn't the person that turns out is the right fit for that transition. I'm curious, when you're going through this process and you get to a point where you realize maybe family succession isn't even an option, isn't even a good option for the business. How do you bring up that topic? How do you talk through that when, maybe this generational plan is just not going to work?
It's a very difficult conversation, but a very important one. And it really is part of our process. So the exiting shareholders, generation one, would know that as part of our process, we're going to interview stakeholders and we're going to assess readiness of the next generation to lead. And it does happen, Clinton, where we find out that that family member is not ready. They're not earning the respect of their peers. they're not executing in operations, and we do need to share that with generation one. And so that is a benefit of working with a third party, that we can have some of those difficult conversations. Better to know upfront than to be 3 years into a succession plan and have people leave or not have a plan B. And so I think, as we go through that process, there's things like personality, PI tests. There's also feedback. There's things where certainly maybe they just need development and they need some training or some awareness of how to get to the next level. Other times they just don't have it in them. And either way, good. That's where the plan really needs to start, is let's identify leadership, put the business first, and identify the leaderships that's going to help this business continue to grow.
Obviously, all the stuff you're talking about it can be very difficult conversations to have with people. And obviously, family members are probably also learning a lot more about each other than they ever maybe even knew. And they're also sharing that with you. So I'm curious, like, how do you build trust as the third party coming in, as the stranger sort of at the table, so to speak? How do you make sure you're building trust and a rapport with the family so that you can have these open and honest conversations?
Clinton, I always think about that before we start these processes and start having some interviews and meetings with various stakeholders. Certainly, it's important for us to listen. It's important for us to be non-judgmental. I'm often very surprised by how quickly people will open up. And hopefully that is because we build trust. And I think it's mostly because nobody's really asked them these questions before. What do you really want from this business? Where do you want to see it go? What do you want your career to look like? And it's an opportunity for them to share thoughts that they've been accumulating for years about opportunities for them or the business. And I think they really enjoy that process and get a chance to voice their opinion.
So the goal then obviously is that when this is done, you have a happy family, you have happy plan, it's just everyone's on the same page. That must make you feel pretty good too when you get a chance to actually work through this with families, I'd imagine.
It does, because you're pulling for them for sure, and it's a difficult process. You're excited that they're committed to it. You want to go in there and first rule is do no harm. You
Right.
don't want to set back relationships. You hope that if conflict exists or it arises, that it's healthy. And I think it's important that, you can build that trust with them and with each other, and then have some healthy conflict or debate about the direction of the company and who fills what role. But that at the end of the day, they're better off for it. This doesn't pop up at the Thanksgiving dinner conversation because they've already talked about it. They've already worked through it.
Right.
And you're right. It's a process where you feel like you can bring your experience and some of the tools and really help. And so you're right. It's very rewarding work.
So for somebody who's considering passing their business down to the next generation, say they're thinking about it right now and they know they got some time ahead of them to think about this, what are some of the things that they should do or they can do now to lay the groundwork for a successful family succession plan?
Yeah, I think two things. If somebody's thinking about, hey, I should really start a process like this. One is think about what's most important to you. As I start conversations with business owners, sometimes that the answer to that is legacy. Sometimes it's really family harmony. I worked with a client recently where the community was his number one concern. So keeping jobs local, helping keep the community vibrant. And so think about what's most important, because that might drive some of the decisions you run with in this process. And for those of you that say getting top dollar, I think that's an equally fair answer. So, but think about what's most important for you. The next probably most important step is get a team put together. There's a lot of implications for this. Having a good attorney, having a good accountant, understanding the taxes, maybe having somebody facilitate some of this conversation. Whoever you have good relationships with that have some experience in this space, and there are many good professionals out there that can help. I think once you have that team together, they can help you navigate through a process and make sure that everything's well planned out and thought through.
Regarding what you just mentioned about getting top dollar for your business, what are some of the ways too that, if people are thinking about this now and they have the time, how can they make sure that final valuation of their business is something that meets their goals and it gets them to that next phase in their life?
We always encourage that the client look at a business valuation, whether that's a formal business valuation or something less formal. It's important to understand how buyers are going to value the business and run them through maybe a market approach or income approach. We have a team that will look at where are multiples in the industry, what's most appropriate. Is it a multiple of revenue or earnings? Is it the balance sheet that we look at? What are those value drivers? Because if you do have time, you can really focus on those value drivers and get a better sales price. And so understanding where the market is and what's driving price is a fruitful exercise, especially if you have a few years in front of you.
And what about those businesses that find out, as we were just talking about, that family succession is not really the best option for them, and they're positioned well and the valuation is right? Who are some other buyers that could potentially step up and purchase that business?
I think you think about it in terms of whether it's the current employee or family group that's going to continue to own the business, or whether it's an outside party. If it is the current employee base and it's not the family, maybe an employee stock ownership plan is a good option for you. There's a lot of benefits to that. There might be some tax advantages. And so maybe you have a good management team that is non-family, and that might be a mechanism for you to transfer ownership. If you're looking outside of the company and you look to third parties, they're strategic buyers. So maybe a competitor, and there's pros and cons to that. Maybe somebody from outside your market, but somebody in the industry. And then there are financial buyers, private equity groups that may be interested in getting into the industry or expanding their markets. So, understanding who the buyer is might greatly impact your strategy and even how you plan for that. So I think, again, understanding who your buyer is one of the very first steps. And I think we've got teams, and Clinton, we might want to talk about that in further podcasts, just to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of those buyers.
Right. And we've had some really good conversations so far on the podcast about transitioning your business and exiting your business. And we hope to have more to come, because obviously, as we just discussed, this is a complex topic. It is an important topic, and it's a big one for any business owner to have to tackle. So, Chad, thank you so much for the insight today on the family succession process. I think this was a really good episode, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Clinton.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Ebb and Flow podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. At Eide Bailly, what inspires you inspires us. We provide a suite of accounting, advisory, and technology services with your business in mind. Visit our website to access tools and resources tailored for you. eidebailly.com/ebbflow. This podcast is distributed with the understanding that Eide Bailly LLP is not rendering legal, accounting, or other professional advice. Listeners should consult with their business advisors before acting on any of the information or opinions shared. For audience questions and topic ideas, visit eidebailly.com/ebbflow. That's eidebailly.com/EBFLOW. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to tune in next time.